plenty.
From the Sunshine State, this is Tampa Bay's 10 Talk.
It's time for FLALAW, brought to you by the personal injury attorneys of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. This hour will be informative, along with taking your questions and comments. Now, here are your hosts for today's show.
That's right. You are tuned in to FLALAW live on the radio. This is your live legal call-in talk show coming to you every week on Tuesdays at 5 o'clock. Hopefully you are a faithful listener and you join us every week. But if not, welcome. Glad to have you here. This is your opportunity and chance to call in with your live legal questions of the air. And we're here for the next hour until 6 o'clock. And you have myself. I am a partner at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes Injury Lawyers. My name is Jacqueline Bryant, and I'm going to be available this evening to answer your legal questions live on the air. So before we get started, I'm going to give you all the details on how you can continue to watch throughout the entire show tonight, and also how you can get your calls in and your questions in either by phone, like calling into the station, or online through one of our streaming platforms. So that way you have an opportunity to chat with me this evening. I would love to hear from you and take a stab at any of your personal injury or legal questions that you might have tonight. As I said, this is FLALAW live on the radio, and we are the hosts, Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. We are personal injury attorneys, and the firm has been around since 1955. This is actually our 70th anniversary year that we are celebrating. So 70 years in business, serving and helping people that have been injured as a result of car accidents, slip and falls, and other personal injury type matters. And so, of course, it's only right that be the topic of our discussion this evening is personal injury cases and various topics related to that. We'll be spending some time this evening talking about the traffic situation we have here in the state of Florida and how it does result in, unfortunately, quite a lot of pedestrian accidents, and then that ultimately turn into fatalities. And it is an issue that, unfortunately, is becoming problematic and has been for a while in our state, particularly the Tampa Bay area. And there was a pretty extensive piece in the Tampa Bay Times about it, and giving different discussion on what can be done by the legislatures, engineers, and different things, even law enforcement, to try to help improve the traffic situation that we have in the Tampa Bay area in regards to pedestrian accidents and pedestrian fatalities. So definitely going to spend some time on that topic tonight and get into a little bit of that. But of course, we'll touch on quite a lot of things specific to our state in Florida when it comes to personal injury accidents, because that can be a huge umbrella of a lot of different things that that can entail. I was just talking off air with our engineer, Ed, how, it could even fall into products liability, mass torts. There's all kinds of things that personal injury is about. It's not just a car accident, although that's kind of the major thing that people kind of consider and think about. Especially in our state, we are a very vehicle-based. We're not a walk-friendly or walkable type of a town like, other places like New York, where a lot of people don't even have driver's licenses in those areas. But here, it's very much very vehicle driven, and you have to pretty much drive just to get about most places, around here. And so what does that mean in turn? Heavy traffic and high chances of traffic injuries, traffic accidents, pedestrian injuries, bicycle accidents, motorcycle accidents, and you name it. But that doesn't mean that that's all there is under that personal injury umbrella. At the end of the day, it could mean a lot of things. It could be, medical malpractice, products liability. There's other cases involving, prescription drugs and various different medications. There's, dog bites, which is strict liability. So there's so many different things that can fall under that umbrella. But we'll focus a little bit of time tonight talking about our situation here locally when it comes to pedestrian accidents. But Before I get into all that and we start the show and open up the phone lines for the discussion, I want to give you all the details and the information on how you can chime in tonight because, of course, want you to participate. Would love to hear from you and get your questions answered live on the air. So that call-in number is going to be 727-441-3000. Again, that's 727-441-3000. That's the number to call in. The lines are open. You can, of course, dial that number and ask me your question live over the air, and I'll answer it for you, or try to point you in the right direction if it's something that we don't do, or if it's outside of my area of knowledge or expertise. Of course, I can try to get you in at least the right avenue so you know what kind of attorney you need to seek out in order to set up some sort of a consultation in regards to whatever your matter is. Of course, if it's personal injury, then of course we can take a stab at it tonight and potentially talk off the air if it ends up being something that we can help you with. Now, if you are not able to call in, maybe you're a little bit shy this evening, you don't want to hear your voice on the radio, but you do have a burning question, or you have a question for a friend, family member, someone that you know who's dealing with an issue and you're not really sure what to do, or you're not even sure if it's personal injury related. You can also drop your question virtually through our live chat, our live stream. We are streaming right now on 2 platforms, on Facebook and on YouTube. So if you have a Facebook account or YouTube account, you can find us on both platforms, same name. You just search our firm name in the search bar, Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes Injury Lawyers. And there you'll find our live stream. You should see kind of a red circle around the logo that'll let you know that we are live. Click on that, take a look, and drop your question at the bottom. And it'll show to me, and I'll be able to read it right on the air. And it doesn't always have to be a question. Maybe you just want to chime into the conversation and add your own perspective or point of view. Maybe you've been through something similar in your life, and you just want to add your perspective in terms of how it all worked out for you in your situation. Happy to discuss that with you and give you the opportunity to share. You never know who could benefit from your story. So happy to hear from you all tonight in regards to that. And also, if you don't get to stay for the full show, maybe you're on the way to the Lightning game or something fun and you're not able to tune in right now to the whole show, but you want to go back and listen to it later, you can. We now have our podcast up and running. Our past shows are currently on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcasts. So if you search the name of the show, which is FLALAW Live on the Radio, you'll be able to find our podcasts. You can find some of our past shows that are up there. And then, of course, tonight's show will eventually be uploaded as well. And you'll be able to listen to the full show in its entirety at your leisure. You can pause it, stop it whenever you'd like, get back to it. And we'd love to see you following us on those platforms as well. And share that with your friend. If you're a legal enthusiast or you just have a love for the law, then that's a great podcast to follow, is us on FLALAW Live on the Radio. So with that being said, the lines are open. So feel free to give us a call if you have any questions. But I, of course, am going to jump right in it. As I said before, we are celebrating our 70th anniversary. So happy 70th birthday to us at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. We've been in business, as I said, in personal injury law since 1955. And as I mentioned before, we are one of those states that is considered like a tourist attraction. Our beaches are, number one in the nation. But we've tons of theme parks. Everyone thinks of Florida and they automatically think Disney. We're just synonymous with Disney. And I think people will probably be surprised, the number of Floridians who've probably never even been to Disney, which I think is a little sad. Everybody should experience Disney, but I digress. Florida is not just Disney, but that is what we become known for, internationally, I think, is Disney World and our beaches and traffic and so forth and so on. And so, of course, you can imagine why car accidents tend to be the main thing that personal injury lawyers handle and, seem to discuss the most, because car crashes are just so frequent and common in our area. And what I think a lot of people get confused about is when they hear the fact that Florida is a no-fault state, and they are really just not really all that well informed to understand what that means. And so I know we've discussed it on the show before, but it comes up time and time again in my practice. I feel like I explain this at least 3 times a week to someone in some way, shape, or form, whether it's a new client who's calling me about a case, or it's a family member, or a current client who's not understanding why their own insurance is coming into play after they've been hurt by somebody else, and they don't quite appreciate what does Florida no-fault PIP insurance mean. So before we dive into some of the other facts we're going to be talking about today, I just want to make sure I'm very clear and explain what Florida no-fault and PIP is. At the end of the day, no fault essentially means that you're entitled to medical benefits and also lost wage benefits under your own policy, regardless of fault. So those benefits will pay out at the as a result of a car accident, no matter who caused it. So if you are injured, even if it's your own fault or the other party's fault, or you don't really know who's at fault, you just know that there was a car accident, you were involved in it, and now you're hurt. You do not have to have a determination of liability or responsibility by an insurance company or a court of law, a jury, or a police officer to be entitled to the no-fault benefits. So that's essentially where that name no fault comes from, because fault does not matter. It's PIP, and that's another word for it, or personal injury protection benefits. And those are automatic, meaning anytime you get hurt, you go to the doctor, you go to emergency room, you get in an ambulance, you go to an urgent care, you go to a walk-in clinic, anything that you do, chiropractor, following a car accident, those benefits will pay 80% of the medical treatment up to $10,000. It will also pay 60% of your wage loss up to $10,000. So that means there's a combined pot for the medical and the wage loss. So the medical and wage loss are coming out of the same pot. So there's not, to clarify, there's not $10,000 for medical and $10,000 for wage. It's just the $10,000, but you can get wage loss and medical out of that $10,000. And it will pay up to the 10. And so once that, of course, runs out, then the remainder of your medical balances or bills that are not paid out of the 10,000, those are what are pursued from the at-fault parties coverage, which would be their bodily injury coverage. So when you're looking at coverages and trying to figure out what's what, you automatically always have the no fault, the PIP. That's something that everyone must carry according to Florida law. Bodily injury, on the other hand, is what you want the other person to have. If that person has injured you in a car accident, they need to have bodily injury coverage. If they don't have bodily injury coverage, then chances are you won't be able to make a claim, sadly, because that means that they don't have the appropriate coverage for you to make a claim under their policy. And so you say, well, I have bodily injury coverage. Does that mean I can go under my own bodily injury? Unfortunately, it does not. Bodily injury coverage protects someone else. So if you injure someone else or you cause an accident, someone else is hurt by your actions, then your bodily injury coverage will cover that person's bodily injury. It will not cover your own if you are injured in a car accident. So what do you need to have to cover your own injuries? That's where uninsured motorist coverage comes in. So we're talking about a lot of different things here. PIP, the no fault, is automatic regardless of fault. Doesn't matter if you caused it, didn't cause it, not sure who caused it. You still get the PIP automatically. BI is what the other person needs to have in order for you to make a claim against the at-fault party's insurance coverage for bodily injury. And then UM is what you need to have on your own policy to protect you in the event that that person that either hit you or injured you does not have the BI. Your UM, or uninsured motorist coverage, will then kick in. So hopefully that simple breakdown of the process helps you understand it a little bit better. But as I've said many, many times before on this show, if you're not sure about your insurance coverages, maybe you're getting ready to, start a new policy, and you're trying to make sure you have all the right coverages, or you're getting the ones that you need that are going to protect you and your family, your precious cargo that you drive around in your vehicle with. You want everybody to be insured in your household, and you're not sure what to get, you can always give us a call. We're more than happy to talk to you about that and set up a time to speak. Or you can just shoot us a quick copy of your insurance deck sheet and say, these are the coverages I have, or these the ones that you would recommend, and that sort of thing. And always happy to do that for our clients and future clients. With that being said, though, going back to the PIP, because I recently had a conversation with someone this week about the PIP coverage. What you must know is that you have to use that after a car accident for your medical care or treatment, or else your health insurance typically will not pay. Health insurance after a car accident is going to be secondary to the PIP coverage. What does that mean? That doesn't mean you can't use your health insurance at all. It just means that you're supposed to use your PIP coverage or your no-fault coverage on your on your auto insurance first. Once that's used and it's run out, because it does very quickly run out, $10,000 does not go very far, unfortunately, after a car accident, especially if, there's been ambulance transport, or you went to the emergency room, and then once you got to the emergency room, you had CT scans and MRIs and CAT scans and all kinds of imaging, done, or, God forbid, you have to end up being admitted. Then that $10,000 is easily gone very, very quickly. And so then at that point, once it runs out, health insurance kicks in. But you have to be able to show that you've used that coverage first, typically before your health insurance will pay the bills, because, again, health insurance is secondary coverage after a car accident, and the PIP coverage is primary. And so if there isn't PIP coverage, or you don't own a vehicle and you don't have the PIP coverage, then, of course, calling us, attorneys like ourselves, to kind of assist with that process, so that, your health insurance, is properly advised and the benefits are properly coordinated, so that they're aware that there is no PIP, or that there won't be any PIP payable for your case, so that the health insurance knows that they're supposed to pay first and foremost. Then that's something that, we could help with and assist with, because a lot of people, may get tripped up when it comes to that, showing that, I don't own a car, I don't have auto insurance, I'm not entitled to it, or I don't live with a relative who has it, or things like that, to be able to prove that they can still use their health insurance first. So those are kind of the unique, intricacies when it comes to Florida no-fault PIP coverage, because a lot of states don't have it. And I think, it's gone up to the legislature multiple times to get rid of the PIP. And each time it's been unsuccessful so far. I don't know if it's still pending. I heard that they were starting the bill again to get rid of PIP and go to a $25,000 minimum bodily injury coverage state. So essentially, we would no longer be a no-fault state. You would no longer have to carry that PIP coverage, but now you would be a mandatory requirement that everyone would have the bodily injury coverage of $25,000. So that's been the proposal in the past. It has failed. I believe about 2 years ago, it was vetoed by the governor. So I'm not sure where it stands now, if it's being brought up again. I've heard some rumblings about it in the news. So if you know, feel free to call in and inform us of the status of whether or not that bill is pending again. Legal minds, may agree or disagree on that matter, whether we should keep the PIP or whether we should go to a mandatory bodily injury state. But I will say that many states are not no-fault states like we are. Most of them do have mandatory bodily injury, and that's just kind of the norm across the country. And we're kind of one of the few stragglers that are still holding on to, the Florida PIP standard as far as how we handle things. And so, of course, another unique thing about our state, before I jump into some of the pedestrian facts that I want to talk about tonight. 2-year statutes of limitations. We have a very, very, very short statute of limitations in our state nowadays. This is actually recent, since March of 2023. We're actually 2 years now from that date, which means some of the first cases that are under that new statute of limitations are now coming up on their 2-year timeline. And so prior to that, for many, many years, our statute of limitations was 4 years for personal injury lawsuits and negligence claims, for the most part, with the exclusion of, medical malpractice and wrongful death type claims. But for the most part, car accidents, slip and falls, those kinds of things, usually they used to have a 4-year statute of limitations. That changed 2 years ago when there was a big tort reform bill that passed. We've talked about it many times on the air, trying to help keep, our listeners informed about the law and what it means and how their rights are impacted. But now it's 2 years, which means it's very, very short period of time for you to bring your personal injury claims and your lawsuits. And I think it's really important for people to realize gone are the days where you can kind of go to the doctor, wait a while, see if you'll get better, talk to the insurance company back and forth, but don't really do anything. You get a referral, you go to see a specialist, you have MRIs done. The pain is kind of coming and going. You're not really sure yet what you want to do. And before you know it, 2 years have come and gone. And now the doctor says you need a surgery. That back pain that you were dealing with for 2 years chickens have come home to roost. And you're like, oh, wow, I need a surgery. I need to call a lawyer now. And it's too late now. And some people think, well, that might sound unrealistic. I'm not going to wait 2 years to call a lawyer. But you'd be surprised. And the reason why I think a lot of people delay in initially seeking legal help after car accidents is because they think that they'll get better. Or they think that it's not all that big of an issue. Or they think that, this is just an ache and pain. It can't be that bad. And then over time, it progressively gets worse. And they start out, conservatively, just taking some over-the-counter pain medicine, or, they'll see a chiropractor here and there and get an adjustment from time to time. No big deal. And then the pain just doesn't go away. And you'd be surprised. 2 years can fly by. It's still hard to believe that COVID was 5 years ago at this point. And so time-wise, it can really sneak up on you. 24 months is a very, very short period of time, and you must act quickly because that 24-month period is a permanent bar. So it's not like, we can go petition the judge and say, Judge, this woman or man has been severely hurt. They are now facing, a lumbar fusion and, hundreds of $1,000s of medical bills. And if they had known this sooner, they would have brought the claim sooner, but they just found out about the surgical recommendation. Can you reopen the statute of limitations and allow them to bring their claim? Sorry, you just can't. And that's kind of like statute of limitations. We abbreviate as SOL. And you can think of another phrase that goes with SOL, and I'll just let you figure that part out. But that's basically what it means is you're out of luck because that's a bar, a permanent bar. And so you just don't really have the time to sit and wait and nurse your injuries and not seek legal advice or legal counsel. You do have to be, kind of vigilant about it and act quickly if you are in the pursuit of justice when it comes to the injury that you've sustained. So that's something just to be aware of, knowing that in the state of Florida, that has now changed, and you're now facing a shorter statute of limitations when it comes to injury cases. So with that being said, injury is our bread and butter. That's what we do. That's how we have sustained this law firm for 70 years, helping people that have been injured. And so we, of course, are going to talk specifically about pedestrian accidents and how these can be so severe and so serious when it comes to the injuries. And unfortunately, a lot of times will lead to death when it comes to these types of accidents. And so I'll get into this article. It's very lengthy, but I think it was really informative for people that live in this area, Tampa Bay area. So I'll talk about the two articles that we found. Actually, my partner, Matt Noyes, shared them with me. And it was pretty eye-opening to see what we're facing in this area in terms of just the number of fatal pedestrian accidents is quite alarming, even higher than our murder rate in the state, which is really sad. So we'll get to that in just a moment. We're going to take a short break. And when we come back from the commercial, we'll go over the state of Florida and how we stack up when it comes to traffic fatalities, when it comes to pedestrians. So we'll be back shortly after this quick break, and then we'll be talking about that with myself, Jacqueline Bryant. See you soon.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
After a car accident, there are many questions that you need answers to. Who pays for my car repairs? Who pays for the medical bills? What about my lost wages? And more. The personal injury law firm of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes has been answering these questions for their clients for nearly 70 years. Since 1955, they've been a voice of the injured in the legal system. As one of the longest established law firms in Tampa Bay, Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes is here to answer your questions. Listen to their live call-in radio show on this channel every Tuesday evening from 5 to 6 p.m. or call them at 727-796-8282 or visit them at voiceoftheinjured.com. Offices Clearwater, non-attorney spokesperson.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Welcome back. You are listening to FLALAW live on the radio. This is your live legal call-in talk show. The lines are open. Feel free to give us a call tonight with your legal questions at 727-441-3000. Again, that's 727-441-3000. The lines are open. I would love to hear from you and answer your questions live on the air tonight. Of course, just to remind you, we are streaming live right now on two platforms, Facebook and YouTube. Feel free to search for us on Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes Injury Lawyers. Type that name into the search bar, Perenich. You should find our live feed going on right now. You can ask your questions, drop them in the little comment section, and I'll read them out live over the air. In order to respond to your inquiry or your comment, feel free to just chime in if you are interested in the topic that we're discussing and you just want to give a little bit of your own personal feedback. Would love to hear from you when it comes to these topics. As I said, my name is Jacqueline Bryant, and usually I'm the one kind of hosting the show, and I'm not the one that's talking and answering the questions. So in case you didn't know, I'm a partner at the personal injury law firm of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. Been with the firm 13 years now, and we have been hosting this show for a few years, giving you the opportunity to call in or comment, text your questions to our platforms here on Facebook and YouTube so that you can get them answered live on the air every Tuesday at 5. So with that being said, I do have some interesting articles that I want to chime in about that both kind of tie in similarly together when it comes to our traffic here in the state of Florida and specifically Tampa Bay pedestrian car accidents. And so I'll take some time and go through this with you. But this basically says, see where Florida ranks as one of the worst states to drive in. And I was surprised that we weren't as high up on the list as I expected because I thought it would be a little bit higher. But basically, it says from traffic jams, potholes to gas prices, driving can be a stressful and dangerous undertaking. And where you live plays a role in how bad it can be. So there was a study that was done by Wallet Hub, which is actually more of like a financial type website, but they apparently did a study on worst states to drive in 2025. And essentially, they were able to determine where each state ranked. And according to their research, they basically polled commute information, gas prices, rush hour, traffic congestion, and then overall road quality, I guess, were the factors that they were looking at in order to determine which states are the worst to drive in. They said that the best states to drive in are ones that are usually relatively rural, which isn't very surprising. They have smaller populations, low cost of living, and their roads tend to be better maintained than more metropolitan city type regions. And then they just say that the motorists tend to be safer in those areas. With that being said, drumroll, Florida came in number 14 on the 2025 list of worst places to drive. And essentially, they, again, are looking at safety factors, traffic, infrastructure, that sort of thing. And they typically said that Florida ranked pretty high on rush hour traffic and congestion, which I'm not really surprised about. I feel like it's gotten worse over the past couple years, especially in Pinellas, in St. Petersburg, where I drive a lot. It just seems like 275 has become horrendous lately. So not surprised at all that Florida ranked 14 on worst places to drive. I would imagine a big part of that is probably Orlando and Miami and those areas, but I'm just guessing. There's no data specifically to say that. But according to the list, in case you're wondering, Kansas is the best state to drive in, apparently. And that's followed by, I'll just kind of round out the top 5, Idaho, Indiana, Iowa, and Oklahoma. Those are the top 5 places to drive. On the other hand, if you want to know who were the top 5 worst, because Florida didn't make the top 5, it's actually Hawaii, surprisingly. Hawaii, Washington, Montana, New Hampshire, and Colorado ranked the top of the list in terms of worst places to drive in the country. And you say, well, why does that matter? And I think it's important because a lot of times people think about personal injury and they're thinking, well, I've never been in a car accident. I've never been hurt. Why should I care about Florida personal injury law or things like that? And I think that's actually a good question. But the reality of it is that accidents don't discriminate. That's why they call them accidents. And, you can't ever predict, whether you're 21 or 71, you just never know if you're going to get into a car accident or you're going to have a slip and fall or you're going to be hit by someone who wasn't paying attention and they were texting on their phone, or, you hit a pothole and some sort of injury occurs. Crashes and, those sorts of things can happen to anyone. There's really no respecter of person when it comes to that. Young, old, rich, poor, it really doesn't matter. And so sometimes people get hung up on, they're like, I'm not a suing type of person. I'm not sue happy. This country is overly litigious and everybody wants to file lawsuits and that's just not my thing. But that's not really what it's about. In my humble opinion, it's more about helping people and understanding that after something like this, a car accident or a slip and fall, or, defective product or medical malpractice, dog bites, severe injuries, they come with large medical bills and expenses. They come with being out of work and not being able to earn income, or at least maybe not earn income to the level that you were before this. Pain, discomfort, loss of enjoyment of life, not being able to interact with your kids or your spouse in the way that you're normally used to, affecting your intimacy, affecting your ability to go out and have fun and just enjoy the things that you normally would have done before this. And it all comes crashing down and you think, this isn't just about a lawsuit. This is about helping people get back on their feet, helping people try to restore some semblance of normalcy to their life before what it was, before they got injured. And so looking at the fact that we have such a congested area, and it's not necessarily the most driver or traffic friendly places, it kind of segues really nicely into this article that I was looking at that my partner gave to me. It is titled, it just came out a couple days ago, Too Many People Die Crossing Tampa Bay Streets, and Here's How to Stop It. So it's basically a really extensive article by Graham Brink and Jim Verhulst over at Tampa Bay Times, really just going into a deep dive of the types of issues that we have here in Tampa Bay when it comes to pedestrian accidents. And so I'm just going to go over a couple of things that are in the article. I'm not going to read the entire article because it is quite lengthy. But essentially, what they found is that a pedestrian is far likelier to die in Tampa Bay than in a much busier city of New York City. Actually, you're 3 times as likely to die as a pedestrian and being hit by someone in Tampa Bay area than you are in New York, considering the size, of New York City. In a typical year in the Tampa Bay area, and that would be Pinellas and Hillsborough County is what we're looking at. This data doesn't include Pasco. But in a typical year, drivers hit more than 1,000 pedestrians, and 10% of them actually do die. So about 100 of that 1,000 end up dying. And so that's walkers, runners, people that are out and about on the roads. This data does not include cyclists. So you can imagine if we include bicyclists, that number would be even greater. At the end of the day, when you consider the fact that these are individuals who are simply walking along the road with no type of vehicle protection, you can imagine that they stand very little chance when things go wrong. And again, we're talking young, old, tourists, local. It doesn't really matter. It could be anyone, especially it could be, someone that you love. And sadly, that's what this article touches on, kind of highlights a few of the people that have recently passed away. And I think our last show last week, now that I'm thinking about it, my colleague Lori Robinson and I were discussing a sad situation about 2 months ago here locally in Clearwater, a Clearwater High School student who sadly was killed on the way to school while being in the crosswalk, crossing the street on a bicycle, and was sadly hit and killed just 2 months ago here in, I think it was on Cleveland in Clearwater. That being said, we have they mentioned a 19-year-old who unfortunately was skateboarding and died as a result of a crane truck that ran a red light and struck him on Gulf to Bay Boulevard. We have a 79-year-old man who was killed while walking with a friend in Dunedin. We have a local PE teacher by the name of Jeffrey Wilson, who was only 54 years old. He was killed while walking downtown with his wife in downtown St. Pete. And all of these victims that I've just mentioned were lawfully in the crosswalk or on a sidewalk. So, some might think, well, what were they doing? Were they jaywalking? Were they in the middle of the road? Nope. According to these statistics and these stories, these are people who were crossing the street or walking down the road lawfully. And so that begs the question, whether legal or not, when the impact occurs, the drivers, have to live with the fact that there's been a fatal crash for the rest of their life, and that makes me think of something I saw on the news recently. It didn't happen here in Florida, but there was the LSU football player who was suspected or expected that he might be the first round, a first round pick for the NFL. He had declared for the draft just a couple days after having been involved in a fatal car accident. I think his name was Lacey, Kyron Lacey, I think his name was. But unfortunately, in December, he had been involved in a car accident that resulted in the death of an older gentleman who I believe was a former Marine. That person died. He left the scene and then ultimately, I guess, turned himself in, and he was getting ready to have a grand jury convene to determine the charges for I think it was vehicular homicide and some other charges that he'd been charged with. That fatality, unfortunately, I'm sure stuck with him. And sadly, he recently took his own life. And so these kinds of accidents can have so many ripple effects and implications down the line. And if we can make our roads safer and we can have law enforcement, do a better job educating the public and the engineers making our roadways safer, I think a lot of these kinds of accidents can be prevented. I know there was a trial maybe a year ago. A lot of people, it was very, very big. The teens that were driving, I think they were speeding, racing on, the Causeway, Bayshore Boulevard. They were on Bayshore Boulevard and they killed the woman and her baby in the stroller. And there was a big trial. And I believe one of the teens, if I'm not mistaken, did get convicted for that. And you think, oh, well, they were speeding. They were racing. Of course, that kind of thing is going to happen when you're making stupid choices. But that's not always where these accidents come from. You'd be surprised. The number of people that get hit by number of pedestrians that get hit by cars are people that are just doing everyday normal things. They're down with their head in the phone. They're texting, or they're looking at their GPS, or they're turning around talking to their kids in the back seat, or they're trying to take a bite of their sandwich because they didn't get to have lunch and they're trying to eat and drive at the same time. And before you know it, boom, a car accident happens. So it's not always some egregious thing, some, racing down the highway that results in these kind of fatalities. It's sometimes very, very simple, mundane things that turn into very, very serious accidents. And so to really understand the depth of the issue, this author, they went in, they kind of pulled the data, they talked to experts. They even went to other cities that ranked even worse than Tampa Bay when it came to pedestrian deaths to try to figure out what they had done to fix the problems, to make some proposals for our area, to try to see what we can do to make some changes. And what they kind of figured out is that what it's going to take is kind of a 4-step process, which is, re-educating the public in terms of you have to stop and yield for pedestrians, that sort of thing. You think that's very, very common, basic driver's ed 101, right? But a lot of people don't know it, or they just don't do it. And so that was one of the things that they found, needs to be done, is just re-educating drivers, redesigning kind of the way our roads are set up here in Tampa Bay. And then, of course, looking at law enforcement agencies doing more to enforce the rules about crosswalks, yielding to the right of way, distracted driving, speeding, that sort of thing, which sounds uncomfortable. It's oh, what does that mean? Now we're going to get, law enforcement cracking down on more on speeding, more speeding tickets, tickets for texting and driving. That may be what it takes, unfortunately, to be able to rectify what we're seeing, which is unfortunately a really, really bad problem when it comes to pedestrian fatalities in our area. And I know they did some studies even in school zones, because you're okay, well, everybody speeds. But even in school zones, they did research over in Hillsborough at Bloomingdale High School. In the school zone, nearly every single driver sped through the school zone when they did the data. There was 7,310 drivers that came through the school zone. 7,171 of them were speeding. And so that's part of the issue, is that people don't realize that speed kills. A lot of times when it comes to whether a pedestrian lives or dies, it's usually just a 10 mile per hour difference. They say from 32 miles per hour, you're probably going to sustain very, very serious injuries. 42 miles per hour could be generally death. So that small ratio in between 32 miles per hour and 42 miles per hour doesn't really feel different to you when you're driving. Most people don't really see or appreciate the difference in speed between 32 miles an hour and 42 miles per hour. That could be life or death, if you hit someone at those speeds, sadly. And so that's why speed is such a big factor, because you might think, well, I'm just going through a school zone at, I'm just going, 10 miles over the speed limit. But those 10 miles, unfortunately, could mean, serious injury versus a fatality or death. So that's some of the things that they're looking at in this particular study. And I know that there have been some bills that have gone up to the legislature when it comes to texting and driving. We do have a texting and driving law. It is something that is very difficult, though, to enforce. I'm sure everyone is aware that it's technically not legal to text and drive. However, from what I understand, most officers are really not enforcing it because they have to be able to really show that you were actually texting. And how can they do that? You could be doing so many other things with your phone in your hand. There's no way to really show that you were actually texting at the time. And so because there's so many exceptions to the current law that we have, it's really, something that the officers just don't enforce. And from what I understand from the data, officers issue only about 17 texting while driving tickets a day across the entire state of Florida. So that gives you a good idea of how many of those texting and driving tickets are being handed out. So what happened last year was that the Florida legislature was actually going to consider a bill for just hands-free. So you can't have it in your hand at all while driving, with, some very few exceptions. Because what they say is that it doesn't matter what you're doing, whether it's texting or not, any type of use of the smartphone is a distraction. And so the hands-free law was pretty much trying to be a remedy to that, to keep the road safer. Well, unfortunately, the bill did fail, as most people would know if we had that by now. So it didn't pass. I do believe it's being brought up again to try to get the hands-free law in place. And a lot of people, they have those nowadays with the little dash holder where you can kind of put your phone in it. So that way you're not holding it in your hand or looking down at it to use it. And so that I think would be a lot safer and a lot less distractions for people. Because I can count, just on the way home tonight, I'm sure you'll see a car that's weaving and swerving or, going slow, or they're not really up to speed with their traffic. Like, what are you doing? And then sure enough, you get right up next to them and what do you know? They're looking down at their phone. So, and those are the kind of people that unfortunately have these kind of serious, unfortunate accidents because they're not paying attention and they're looking down and look, someone walks out, someone's with their stroller and they're not paying attention and they hit them. The other thing that people are looking into, not sure how I feel about it, but it's speed cameras. So, obviously red light cameras have been around for a while. St. Pete got rid of the red light cameras a long time ago. I don't think it raised enough revenue for them to be able to keep it. And so speed cameras might have that same problem. But I think what this article is proposing is that maybe we should bring speed cameras to the Tampa Bay area in order to try to cut down on some of the fatalities and the accidents that we're seeing, because speed is obviously a major factor. And so there's a lot of other areas that do have speed cameras. And, there's data on whether it really works or not. From what I understand, the camera would obviously be recording, the violators. And then if you get, if it triggers you, then you'll get a fine in the mail to whoever the registered owner of the vehicle is. From the data in other places, now they're going all the way across the pond here, but they say that speed cameras did reduce crashes by 39%. and fatalities by 68% from places like England, Scotland, and Wales. Now, coming back over stateside in New York City, they do have areas in New York where there are speed cameras, and they said they saw fatalities fall by 55% in New York City in the areas or zones that had the speed cameras. So, that's something that we may, want to consider in our area, because clearly we have a problem that needs to be addressed. And, if 1,000 people are being killed a year by, pedestrian car accidents, then that's something we probably seriously want to look at as, as a region here in Tampa Bay. And the people say, well, where will the profits go? You're getting all this money now from all these speeding tickets that you're going to be writing from these cameras. I don't know, but maybe it'll go to improving, the roadways, or, better education programs, or here's a novel idea, give it back to the residents, lower our property taxes. So who knows? But that is something that, obviously the legislature can look into. And so people can obviously call their local representatives and congressmen in their areas to try to see if they can get, these sorts of things addressed. Now, the other thing, again, not sure if I'm a big fan of it, but they did look at ways to redesign things. They're doing this over in Tierra Verde. Sarasota has apparently done a ton of this, which is getting rid of traffic intersections and changing them to roundabouts. I don't know if that's my thing. I hate roundabouts, but apparently they're safer, and that's what they said in these areas where they have essentially taken out the traffic signals and redesigned roundabouts. And they say that essentially there's lower emissions from idling cars sitting at traffic lights. So you're not having all this emission into the atmosphere sitting there at red lights. And then they say that obviously you don't have to use electricity to run the traffic lights, and roundabouts still function after hurricanes. When all the traffic lights go out, guess what? Roundabouts don't have a problem because there's no lights there. They apparently say that roundabouts are safer for pedestrians because of the roundabouts force cars to go slower. Look, I don't know. That's the proposal. I've never really been a fan of roundabouts, but it's apparently safer. And it apparently has data to support that it's safer for pedestrians. Like I said, they've been changing some things around here locally. Over in the Fort DeSoto, Tierra Verde area, there were some busy stretches over by the Pinellas Bayway that they've changed into roundabouts. Apparently, Sarasota has embraced this quite a bit. They have installed like a dozen roundabouts. I don't get over Sarasota much, but apparently that's a thing. So we shall see, how this all plays out. But of course, less accidents is what we want to see when it comes to pedestrians and auto injuries. But of course, if it happens, and sometimes it's when it happens, and sadly, because of what we just read about, sometimes it's inevitable, you have to give us a call, because you want to protect your rights and you have to be able to understand what you are entitled to in this state. So I hope that's been informative for you. Hopefully you learned something about the law here in the state of Florida. We will be back next week with our criminal defense attorney, who's going to be talking about some great things in Florida criminal defense law. So please join us back next Tuesday at 5 o'clock with Attorney Z, Zachariah Wade. He'll be on FLALAW live on the radio. Folks, we'll see you next week at 5 o'clock.
WTAN, Clearwater,
FM 106.1,
WDCF, Dade City,
FM 102.3.
Listen.
This is CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by Progressive Insurance.